How do I know? My name's Carroll Shelby, and performance is my business.
Hollywood has a problem with complicated men. It takes them, sands down the rough edges, polishes the mythology, and hands you back something that feels true but isn't. Ford vs. Ferrari is a great film. Matt Damon is magnetic. The racing sequences will make your pulse do things your doctor would not approve of. But the Carroll Shelby in that movie, the folksy, straight-shooting Texan with the cowboy hat and the blank check, that man is maybe 60% of the real story. The other 40% is wilder, sadder, and frankly more interesting than anything James Mangold put on screen. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle, where we go back and find everything Hollywood left on the cutting room floor. The myth versus the man. Here's what the film actually gives you. Matt Damon's Carroll Shelby is charming, shrewd, politically savvy in the way that only Texans and poker players ever truly are, and deeply loyal to the people he believes in. That's all real, that's all accurate. But the film introduces him as though he arrived fully formed. The legendary car builder, the Le Mans winner, the man Ford called when they needed someone to beat Ferrari. It skips almost everything that made him the person capable of doing any of that. Carroll Shelby was born in 1923 in Leesburg, Texas. Population, not many. His father was a rural mail carrier. The family moved constantly, 14 different towns before Shelby finished school, which meant he spent his childhood learning to adapt, to read people quickly, to figure out what a room needed from him before anyone asked. That's not a trivial skill. That's the skill that would later allow him to charm Henry Ford II and Enzo Ferrari's lawyers and a room full of Chrysler executives and a Botswana diamond trader, sometimes in the same week. But here's what the film buries in a single throwaway line. Shelby was sick. Not temporarily sick. Constitutionally, chronically, dangerously sick. He was diagnosed with a heart murmur as a child and spent significant portions of his early years in bed, forbidden from physical exertion by doctors who genuinely believed that too much activity might kill him. A boy who loved speed, who would sneak out to race motorcycles and cars on dirt roads, being told by the medical establishment to please lie down and rest. Ford vs. Ferrari gives you none of this. It gives you a healthy, vigorous Matt Damon who strides into Ford's Detroit headquarters like he owns the building. The real Shelby strode into rooms like that too, but he did it while managing a heart that had been trying to quit on him since childhood. That context changes everything about how you understand the man. The risk-taking wasn't just personality. It was a man who had been told his whole life that the clock was shorter for him than for everyone else, deciding to fill the available time as completely as possible. He also, and the film mentions this so briefly you might blink and miss it, won Le Mans in 1959. Not as a team owner, not as a strategist, as a driver. Carroll Shelby, the man the film portrays primarily as a builder and a negotiator, was one of the finest sports car drivers of his generation. He won the most prestigious endurance race on the planet behind the wheel of an Aston Martin DBR1, sharing the drive with Roy Salvadori. Sports Illustrated named him Driver of the Year, twice. The film gives you the car builder. The history gives you the complete athlete first. The heart that shouldn't have been racing here is a detail that Ford vs. Ferrari completely omits. And it is extraordinary. Carroll Shelby raced with nitroglycerin pills. Not metaphorically, literally. He would place them under his tongue before each driving stint to manage the angina that had been worsening steadily throughout the late 1950s. The same nitroglycerin that gets used to make explosives in tiny doses keeps blood vessels open. Shelby was essentially medicating himself with a component of dynamite in order to stay conscious long enough to win races. Think about what Le Mans asks of a driver. 24 hours, night driving, rain, fatigue, speeds that would make most people's hands shake just thinking about them. Now, do all of that with a heart condition that your doctors have been worried about since you were a child, managing it with pills you're slipping under your tongue in a pit lane in France while the clock is running. That's not in the film, not even close. His heart forced him out of racing in 1960. Not a crash, not a career decision. His body simply told him, firmly and finally, that it was done being pushed like that. And so, Shelby pivoted, because pivoting was what he did, from driving fast cars to building them. The Cobra was born the following year, in 1961, when Shelby had the genuinely audacious idea of dropping an American Ford V8 engine into a lightweight British AC Ace body. He famously claimed the idea came to him in a dream. Knowing Shelby, I believe him, and I also believe he was already halfway to the phone before he woke up properly. The film shows Shelby as a man who transitioned smoothly from racer to builder, one chapter ending and another beginning. The reality is that the transition was forced on him by a failing heart, and that the heart he was building cars around would continue failing for another 30 years before a surgeon finally replaced it entirely. The Shelby you see in Ford versus Ferrari, confident, physically commanding, apparently indestructible, was a man running on borrowed time and knowing it. That knowledge shaped every decision he made. The urgency wasn't just competitive, it was existential. The film gets the Ford deal. Backwards Ford versus Ferrari shows Lee Iacocca approaching Carroll Shelby with Ford's resources and essentially asking him to come build something great. The film frames it as Ford extending an opportunity downward to a talented outsider. This is almost perfectly backwards. The real sequence of events went like this. Shelby had already been working with Ford since 1962, building the Cobra roadsters that were comprehensively destroying Corvettes on American racetracks. The Powered by Ford badge was already on his cars. Ford's total performance program was already in motion. Shelby wasn't an outsider Ford discovered. He was an insider Ford had been developing, who then showed up at their Detroit headquarters with a prepared pitch and a specific ask. $25,000 to build 2 cars that would, in his words, blow off the Corvettes. That's not how Matt Damon plays it. Matt Damon plays a man receiving an offer. The real Shelby was making one. And here's what the film skips entirely. By the time the GT40 program was seriously underway, Shelby's team had already developed the Cobra Daytona Coupe. This car, not the GT40, not the Mustang, the Daytona Coupe, became the only American vehicle ever to win the International GT Championship. It did this in 1965, the same year the film would have you believe Shelby was still figuring out how to compete with Ferrari. His team was already beating Ferrari in a different car, on European tracks, while simultaneously working on the GT40 program. The film compresses this into irrelevance because 2 simultaneous victory narratives are harder to dramatize than one. But the omission misrepresents what kind of operation Shelby was running. This wasn't a scrappy underdog story, not really. It was an already successful racing operation being given substantially more money to do substantially more of what it was already doing well. The underdog framing is dramatically satisfying. It is also, in significant ways, inaccurate. Also, and I feel I need to say this, Shelby did not bet his entire business on Ken Miles winning a race. The film plays this scene for enormous dramatic tension, and it is completely invented. Shelby was a riverboat gambler by temperament, yes, but he was a smart one. Smart gamblers don't put everything on a single hand. That scene is pure Hollywood, designed to raise stakes that were already, in reality, extraordinarily high without anyone needing to wager a company on them. The Cobra betrayal Hollywood forgot to mention. In 1965, at the height of his partnership with Ford, Carroll Shelby signed over the rights to the Cobra name. The price Ford paid him for one of the most iconic automotive brand names in American history was $1. One. I want you to sit with that for a moment. $1. Now, the arrangement came with a verbal assurance from Henry Ford II himself. Shelby could use the name any time he wanted for the rest of his life. Henry Ford II told him this personally, and Shelby, who was a man who built his entire career on handshakes and trust and the assumption that powerful men meant what they said, believed him. Ford versus Ferrari doesn't mention any of this. Not a word. The film ends before the consequences arrive, which is convenient for the myth, but dishonest about the man. Here's what happened. For 20 years, the arrangement worked fine. Nobody thought much about the Cobra name because nobody was doing much with it. Then, in the late 1980s, Shelby began building continuation Cobras, essentially new versions of the original cars, built to original specifications for collectors and enthusiasts. His name was back in the market. The Cobra name was back in circulation. And Ford, suddenly aware that it owned something valuable, remembered the paperwork from 1965. Shelby's attorney later found the contract. Ford's position was straightforward. The name belonged to Ford because Shelby had sold it to them for $1. Shelby's position was equally straightforward. Henry Ford II had promised him personal use of the name for life, but Ford held the paperwork, and Shelby held a memory of a conversation with a man who had been dead since 1987 and could no longer confirm or deny anything. The legal battle consumed years. The man who invented the Cobra didn't own the rights to his own creation. He eventually secured a license, not ownership, a license to use the Cobra name on the original 1960s-era cars. Ford kept the trademark. Shelby got permission to use something he invented, granted back to him by the company he had made famous. The riverboat gambler, it turned out, had trusted a handshake that wasn't worth the hand it was shaken with. That story, the betrayal, the legal fight, the bitter irony of needing permission to use your own name, is more dramatically compelling than half the scenes in the film. And it's completely absent. The real relationship with Ken Miles. The film gives you two volatile men who express affection primarily through physical violence and shouted insults. Shelby and Miles punching each other in the face, throwing things, screaming across garages. It's entertaining. Christian Bale and Matt Damon are wonderful together. But people who actually knew both men tell a meaningfully different story. Ken Miles described driving as his hobby, like golfing is to others. That is not the portrait of a combustible, glory-hungry hothead who punches his employer for fun. The real Miles was sardonic, self-contained, deeply professional, and according to everyone who raced against him, genuinely courteous on the track. He was sometimes called the Sterling Moss of the West Coast. Not a brawler, a craftsman. And Shelby's relationship with him wasn't the volatile bromance the film depicts. It was something quieter, and ultimately more devastating. Shelby called Miles the best test driver he ever knew. He said Miles reminded him of Fangio, the greatest Formula One driver who ever lived at that point, in that he would take time to teach other drivers, help them, share what he knew. A man like that doesn't spend his evenings throwing wrenches at his boss. The film exaggerates the conflict because conflict is dramatic and warmth is harder to film. But what it loses in the exaggeration is the real texture of what Shelby felt when Miles died. This wasn't the grief of a man losing a necessary irritant, a difficult genius he'd learned to manage. This was a man losing his closest professional collaborator, and, by most accounts, one of his closest friends. The depth of that loss only makes sense if you understand that the relationship was built on genuine mutual respect, not comic book antagonism. After Miles died in August of 1966, Shelby American withdrew from Le Mans endurance racing, not for a season, permanently. The team that had beaten Ferrari on their own track and their own race simply walked away and never went back. For a man who defined himself through competition, who had returned from bankruptcy and illness and corporate betrayal to keep competing, that withdrawal is the most eloquent statement he ever made about what Ken Miles meant to him. He could go back to a lot of things. He couldn't go back to that. Le Mans and the conversation that haunted him forever. The film handles the photo finish controversy reasonably well, but it gets the blame wrong. And this matters because how you assign blame changes what the story actually is. Ford versus Ferrari positions Leo Beebe, Josh Lucas playing him as something close to a corporate villain, as the architect of the photo finish decision, the man who stole Ken Miles' victory for Ford's marketing department. Beebe is the obstacle. Beebe is the antagonist. Shelby, in the film's framing, is the man who tried to fight it and couldn't. Here is what Carroll Shelby actually said, in his own words years later. In 1966, Ford didn't cost Ken Miles the race at Le Mans. I did, and I regret it to this day. Leo Beebe came up to me and said, "Who do you think should win the race?" I said, "What do you think ought to happen, Leo?" He said, "I'd kind of like to see all three of them cross the finish line together." So I said, "Let's do it that way then," not knowing that the French would interpret the rules the way that they did. Read that again. Beebe asked a question, Shelby answered it. The photo finish was Shelby's call as much as anyone's. He agreed to it, he suggested it. And then the regulations were interpreted in a way nobody anticipated, and Ken Miles, who at the moment he was told to slow down, was not just leading the race but on pace to lap every other car except his Ford teammates, was classified second. The film needs a villain, so it gives you Beebe. The reality is more uncomfortable. The man who caused Ken Miles to lose Le Mans was the same man who spent the next 46 years carrying that knowledge. building a children's foundation, withdrawing from the race forever, and saying publicly and repeatedly that he was responsible and that he regretted it every day. That's not a villain story, that's a tragedy. And tragedies are harder to sell tickets to. What happened after the credits rolled? Ford versus Ferrari ends. Matt Damon walks away looking thoughtful and Texan. The credits roll, and the real Carroll Shelby still had 50 years left to live. Ford ended their racing agreement with Shelby in 1970. The Mustang program was shut down. By 1971, all three subsidiaries of Shelby American had ceased operations. The man who beat Ferrari at Le Mans was functionally out of a job. His response was to move to Africa. I want to be very clear that this is not a metaphor. Carroll Shelby physically relocated to Botswana, Angola, and the Central African Republic, where he ran a safari company and traded in diamonds. While the American muscle car era was being regulated and taxed into irrelevance, he was tracking game across Central Africa and eating around campfires. I find this genuinely delightful, and I think you should too. He also co-founded the World Championship Chili Cook-Off, launched Carroll Shelby's original Texas brand Chili Mix, and here is the part that will make you look up from your phone. Provided the seed money for a chili-themed restaurant in Dallas in 1975. That restaurant was the very first Chili's bar and grill, over 1,200 locations worldwide. The man who beat Ferrari at Le Mans accidentally co-founded one of the most successful casual dining chains in American history. Not one of those locations has a GT40 on the wall, a missed opportunity. Then Lee Iacocca, fired by Henry Ford II in 1978, now running Chrysler, called his old partner. Shelby joined as performance consultant, turbocharged a series of front-wheel drive economy cars with tremendous enthusiasm and questionable judgment, and helped conceive the Dodge Viper, unveiled at the 1989 Detroit Auto Show. In 1990, his original heart finally quit. A stranger's heart kept him alive. He responded by driving a Viper as pace car at the 1991 Indianapolis 500, less than a year later. 6 years after that, his son Michael donated a kidney. Shelby accepted the most profound gift a son can give and went straight back to testing 500 horsepower Mustangs at 200 miles per hour. He died May 10, 2012, 89 years old, 7 marriages, someone else's heart, his son's kidney, the Chili's thing. The film found room for none of it. The man Hollywood can't package. Here is the problem that Ford versus Ferrari could never solve, and that no biopic about Carroll Shelby will ever fully solve. The man doesn't fit the shape that hero stories require. He was genuinely brave and genuinely duplicitous. He trusted people completely and sometimes betrayed their trust. He was responsible for Ken Miles losing the most important race of his life, and then spent decades being publicly honest about that responsibility in a way that most powerful men never manage. He built legendary cars and accidentally built a restaurant chain. He fought Ford in court and then went back to work for Ford and called it worth it. He was married 7 times and raised miniature horses on a Texas ranch, and spent his final years quietly funding heart and kidney surgeries for children whose families couldn't afford treatment. That last part matters. The Carroll Shelby Children's Foundation, established in 1991 immediately after his transplant, has spent decades covering medical bills for children with coronary and kidney disease who cannot pay for treatment. This is not in the film. It is not in most coverage of Shelby's life. It is the thing he built that will outlast everything else. More than the Cobra, more than the GT40, more than the Mustang, because cars eventually rust and foundations, if they're built right, keep running. His longtime friend Dick Messer said something about Shelby that cut straight to the truth of him. His legacy is the diversity of his life. His life has always been the reinvention of Carroll Shelby. That's right. And that's exactly what the film couldn't capture, because reinvention is hard to dramatize when you only have 2.5 hours and a Ferrari to beat. Ford versus Ferrari gave you the best 2 years of Carroll Shelby's professional life. What it couldn't give you was the man who lived inside and outside those years, the sick kid in Texas who wasn't supposed to race anything, the Le Mans winner who managed his own heart with dynamite pills, the businessman who signed away his greatest creation for $1 and spent 30 years trying to get it back. The friend who made a casual decision in a French pit lane and never forgave himself for it. And the 89-year-old with someone else's heart and his own son's kidney still doing 200-mile-per-hour laps because nobody had technically told him to stop. Carroll Shelby didn't need Hollywood to make him interesting. He already was. The film just caught about 60% of it. The other 40 is right here. Aim if you want the real stories behind the cars, the races, and the men who built them. The parts that didn't make the final cut. This is where you find them. New episodes every week. I'm Johnny, this is American Muscle, and I'll see you in the next one.